Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're cutting through the noise on a really critical public safety issue. One that's only becoming more relevant, frankly, driving after cannabis use, or DACU. With cannabis legalization spreading, well, understanding the real nuances here isn't just important, it's pretty essential for everyone, really, whether you use cannabis or not. For today's Deep Dive, we've pulled a truly comprehensive source for you. It's a systematic review published in the Journal of Cannabis Research, DACU and Colleagues, 2024. Now, if you're not usually deep in academic papers, think of a systematic review as like the ultimate executive summary.
Exactly. It's not just one study's opinion.
Right. This one synthesized findings from 70 different studies, 70, across 7 countries. And get this, over 126,930 participants. Huge number.
Massive data set.
And their big mission was to really characterize people's attitudes toward DACU. So our mission today is to unpack their findings, what they actually mean, and the vital implications for, navigating this evolving landscape safely and smartly.
That's right. And just to give you a bit of a roadmap for this conversation, let me lay out the absolute core takeaways right up front. It'll probably take about a minute. First, what they found was that attitudes toward DACU safety, its acceptability, they're surprisingly mixed, even though, most people generally view it negatively. Second, these attitudes aren't uniform at all. They vary significantly by age, by sex or gender, and interestingly, by how often someone uses cannabis. Third, and this is really crucial, people's attitudes are a very strong predictor. They predict whether they've actually driven after using cannabis or if they intend to in the future. Strong link there. Fourth, DACU is often viewed more favorably or maybe less unfavorably than driving after drinking alcohol. That points to a significant perception gap we need to talk about. Fifth, the relationship between cannabis's legal status, like whether it's recreationally legal, and attitudes toward DACU is actually quite unclear. It's inconsistent across studies. And finally, the perceived risk of being caught for DACU, generally low to moderate, which, as you can imagine, creates its own set of challenges for prevention.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to unpack. So let's dig deeper into that very first point, these mixed attitudes around DC safety. My initial thought, and probably yours too, listener, might be, well, of course it's unsafe. Right. But the research, as you just highlighted, tells a far more nuanced and, frankly, surprising story. So the review looked at 60 studies on this specific theme, and 35 of them did show predominantly negative attitudes.
Right. People generally saying, DACU is dangerous, it impairs driving ability, increases crash risk. It's unacceptable. Pretty straightforward.
But here's the kicker. Like you said, 18 studies reported opposing views. That's nearly a third of the studies in this area where participants actually felt DACU was safe or didn't increase crash risk or didn't impair them. That's significant.
It really is. And what's truly fascinating here, and maybe a bit alarming, is that a subset of participants in 16 of these studies, they even believed cannabis could improve driving or have positive effects anyway.
Improve driving? Seriously?
Yeah. They thought it made drivers more cautious, maybe more relaxed, more alert, calmer, or even just made them drive more slowly. It really points to this deeply ingrained, almost counterintuitive belief for some users.
Okay, improve driving. That sounds like a classic example of some kind of cognitive bias at play. Did the review give any deeper insight into why individuals held such a specific and, let's be honest, seemingly risky belief?
Absolutely. It often came down to what they perceived as moderating factors. They'd mentioned things like the amount of cannabis consumed, their personal tolerance level, how often they use it, and significantly, the time they waited before getting behind the wheel. So it wasn't usually a blanket, I'm invincible sort of thing. It was often more like, I'm fine because I only had a little, or because I waited, or because I know my limits.
Right, the personal calculation.
Exactly. And this ties into a pervasive perception gap identified in several studies. Participants were consistently more likely to believe they personally were less impaired or less likely to have an accident when driving after cannabis, compared to other people doing the same thing.
The classic better-than-average effect.
Precisely. It's that Lake Wobegon effect.
Right.
Everyone thinks they're an above-average driver, even apparently when potentially impaired.
The Lake Wobegon effect meets cannabis. That's quite a combination. So everyone thinks they're the exception. That's a really powerful point for you, the listener, to consider. Given these varied and maybe often self-serving perceptions, how objectively are you assessing your own abilities if you use cannabis? Are you really factoring in all the variables, or are you maybe subject to some of these same perception biases?
Definitely worth a moment of honest self-reflection, I think. Now, it's not just a general pattern, is it? You mentioned these attitudes actually shift quite dramatically depending on who you're talking to. This is where it gets really striking.
Yeah.
Right, the review highlighted clear age differences. 10 studies found that younger participants, particularly youth, were significantly more likely to view DACU as acceptable.
And safe.
Yeah, not just see it as acceptable, but they also reported a greater willingness or intention to actually do it compared to older participants.
And what about sex and gender differences?
Also quite clear. 13 studies showed men were more likely to find DACU acceptable and safe. They were less likely to agree that it's impairing or risky. And beyond that, men in these studies often believed DCU was less dangerous than driving after alcohol. And interestingly, they also thought they were less likely to be stopped by police if they did it.
Wow. Although you said some studies showed no difference.
That's true. It wasn't unanimous across all 70 studies, but the overall trend across those 13 focusing on it was pretty consistent towards men having more lenient views.
Got it. Then there's the critical factor of cannabis use frequency. That seemed like a big one.
Huge. Across 23 studies, frequent users were consistently less likely to believe that cannabis impaired driving. Just flat out didn't think it did or not as much.
And they thought higher intoxication levels were okay.
Exactly. More inclined to think higher levels were safe for driving. And generally, they just held more positive attitudes toward DCU overall, which predictably led to a greater willingness and intention to engage in it.
So it seems like the more you use it, the less risky you perceive driving after using it to be.
That's the strong trend, yes. There was only one study cited that didn't find this link between frequency and perceived collision risk.
Yeah.
But overwhelmingly, the data pointed that way.
So if you, listening, find yourself identifying with these demographics, maybe younger, male, or a frequent cannabis user, this research strongly suggests your perceptions might lean more towards optimism about DCU safety.
And this isn't about judgment at all. It's purely about self-awareness. It raises that important question. Are you factoring in the potential for this kind of bias when you assess your own risk? Understanding these demographic trends can genuinely help challenge your own assumptions and maybe, hopefully, lead to safer choices.
Absolutely. And it's not just interesting how these perceptions differ by group. What's truly compelling, you said, is how they directly predict what people actually do on the road.
Exactly. It's not just abstract thinking.
So your beliefs aren't just ideas floating around. They're deeply tied to real-world behavior.
Precisely. The review found a really strong and consistent association here. 26 studies consistently showed that positive attitudes toward DACU predicted actual past DACU behavior.
So if you think it's okay, you're more likely to have done it.
Yes. And also a greater future intention or willingness to do it again. And it works both ways. People with a history of DACU also tended to have more favorable attitudes afterwards.
A feedback loop.
Classic feedback loop, yeah. Your actions can reinforce your beliefs, and your beliefs can drive your actions.
You mentioned a truly striking detail from one study earlier about people driving even when they felt impaired.
Yeah, that was quite something. It found that a full 30%, 3 out of 10 participants who personally perceived their driving to be impaired by cannabis still reported driving after using it.
Wow. That's a concerning disconnect. It's like knowing it's not safe, but doing it anyway. Cognitive dissonance, maybe?
It certainly looks like it.
Yeah.
Knowing the risk or feeling the impairment, but overriding it. And this goes even further. Higher perceived safe intoxication levels correlated directly with more frequent DCU.
So the more someone thought they could handle?
The more likely they were to drive after using. For instance, one study found for each unit increase on a 0 to 10 scale of how intoxicated someone felt was safe to drive, the odds of them having driven after cannabis in the past month increased by like 18 to 68%.
Huge jump.
It suggests people really act on that belief, pushing the boundaries of what they consider safe based on their own internal, possibly flawed, calibration.
This feels like a really crucial takeaway for you, the listener. Your beliefs aren't just opinions you hold in your head. They directly influence your actions on the road. Understanding this direct link between your attitude and your behavior is, honestly, the absolute first step towards making safer choices for yourself and for others. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Let's tackle that perception that's quite common you mentioned, but genuinely needs a closer look. How driving after cannabis compares to driving after drinking alcohol. The general trend you said across 31 studies was that DACU was considered less dangerous, less impairing.
Less risky, yeah. Less dangerous, less impairing. Less risky than driving after drinking alcohol. That was a common thread. And again, this belief was particularly prevalent among youth, men, and frequent cannabis users. Those same groups often pop up.
Why do you think that perception exists? Did the review offer any clues?
Well, connecting the dots, the review suggests it might be partly due to limited exposure to DCU dangers compared to alcohol. We've had decades of really widespread, intensive campaigns about alcohol-impaired driving. Think drive sober or get pulled over, MDD.
Right, it's been drilled into us for generations.
Exactly. That messaging is ubiquitous. It's created a pretty clear, widely accepted understanding of the risks. The dangers of DCU haven't had nearly that same level of sustained public health focus. Or maybe for some, it's simply a lack of thought given specifically to DCU risks.
But perception isn't reality here, right? What's the factual counterpoint?
And this is the crucial factual counterpoint that the review really emphasizes. It's vital to grasp this. While the perception often favors cannabis as being less risky, the actual evidence experimental studies, epidemiological data from real-world populations, consistently demonstrates that driving after alcohol use is more dangerous than DAC.
More dangerous.
Okay.
Yes.
That being said, the research also found that cannabis impairment has been shown to affect driving performance significantly, to an extent similar to a blood alcohol concentration of about 0.04 to 0.06%.
Which is below the typical 0.08 legal limit in many places, but still.
Still definitely impaired. It's absolutely not safe driving, even if it's statistically less risky than drunk driving at higher BACs. Impairment is impairment.
Good distinction. And was there consensus on mixing the two, cannabis and alcohol?
Oh, absolutely. Crystal clear across studies. Driving under the combined influence of cannabis and alcohol was universally thought to be riskier than using either substance alone. That's seen as a definite no-go. A potent and dangerous combination.
Okay, so this is a really vital distinction for you, the listener, to internalize. Less dangerous than alcohol does not in any way mean safe. Not at all.
Not even close.
DFU still carries a significant risk of motor vehicle collision, and mixing cannabis and alcohol, that just amplifies the risk dramatically. So don't let that relative comparison cloud your judgment about the absolute safety, or lack thereof. Now, with cannabis legalization expanding, across the U.S., Canada, other places, a big question is what actually happens to people's attitudes towards driving after use? Does legal mean safe in people's minds? And the answer, it seems, is less clear than you might think.
That's correct. The 15 studies looking specifically at this relationship had quite mixed findings. It wasn't a simple legalization equals more acceptance of DFU picture.
Really? How so?
Well, some studies indicated that drivers in states with legal recreational cannabis actually view DCU as more problematic or risky. Maybe legalization brought more awareness or discussion. But then, other studies found no clear differences in attitudes before versus after legalization went into effect, or when comparing people in legal states versus non-legal states. So it's really not straightforward.
What about the Canadian experience? They legalized nationally.
Yeah, looking at Canada pre- and post-legalization, most participants anticipated a rise in how often DCU happened. But, interestingly, most didn't intend to engage in it themselves. It's that familiar disconnect again, thinking other people will do it more, but not me.
And was there anything particularly concerning found?
Yes, this one is quite worrying. One study actually found that participants who were already in a remedial program for impaired driving, they understood legalization to mean that DCU is a low-risk activity.
Wow, that's exactly the wrong message.
Precisely. It highlights a really dangerous potential misinterpretation that public health campaigns absolutely need to address head-on. Legal does not equal safe when it comes to impairment.
So, for you, the listener, the message here is crystal clear. Don't misinterpret legal changes as some kind of endorsement of safety. Legalization primarily regulates access, sales, production.
Taxation, usually.
Right. It absolutely does not eliminate the inherent risks of impaired driving, regardless of the substance. It's really about being informed about the risks, not just about what's legal or not. Okay, finally, let's talk about the perception of getting caught. That's usually a significant factor in deterring any risky behavior, right? Fear of consequences. And the review found that across 25 studies looking at this, there was a pretty consistent indication of a low to moderate perceived risk for getting caught for DACU.
Low to moderate, yeah. Especially when compared directly to the perceived risk of getting caught for driving after alcohol. People generally think they're much more likely to get busted for drunk driving.
How low are we talking?
Well, in several studies, somewhere between 1/3 and 2/3 of participants believe they probably wouldn't be stopped by the police if they drove after using cannabis. That's a pretty significant number, thinking they can get away with it.
And why is that perception so common?
It's often attributed, even by participants themselves sometimes, to the acknowledged difficulty for law enforcement. Determining cannabis-related impairment roadside is just technically harder than using a breathalyzer for alcohol.
Right, the science isn't quite as simple yet.
Exactly. And this perception of low risk seemed particularly common among younger people, maybe reflecting less awareness about the evolving enforcement methods that do exist.
Despite thinking they wouldn't get caught, did people support tougher measures?
Interestingly, yes. Participants in some studies showed strong support for preventive policies. Things like per se laws setting a legal limit for THC in the blood or saliva, like we have BAC for alcohol, and also random roadside testing. They generally agreed that increasing detection and punishment would likely deter people.
So they want it to be harder to get away with, even if they think it's easy now.
Seems that way, however, and this is an important however, the evidence for the actual deterrent effect of increased apprehension, especially on users who already have a history of DCAC, is mixed. Some of these individuals, the repeat offenders you might say, were actually less worried about charges. And some were more willing to drive specifically if they thought there was no chance of detection. It suggests that for a certain subset, the perceived lack of certainty in getting caught can outweigh the potential severity of the penalty itself. If they think they won't get caught, the punishment doesn't matter as much.
That makes sense. So for you, the listener, what this really means is that while the perceived risk might feel low, actual laws exist. Enforcement methods like roadside oral fluid testing for THC are present and constantly evolving in many places. Canada, Australia, some U.S. states are using them.
They are definitely out there.
So don't let a perception of low risk lead you into genuinely risky and, let's not forget, illegal behavior. The consequences, legal, financial, personal, causing harm to others can be incredibly severe regardless of whether you think you'll be caught or not. Okay, so to try and bring it all together, this deep dive into the research by DACU and colleagues, synthesizing all those studies, it really reveals a complex picture, doesn't it? Attitudes toward driving after cannabis use are messy.
Definitely messy.
While the majority of people in most studies do view DACU as unsafe, there's this significant minority, and these specific demographic groups, particularly youth, men, and frequent users who hold more favorable views, or maybe operate under some pretty serious misperceptions about the risks or their own abilities.
And crucially, as we've hammered home, these attitudes aren't just opinions. They are powerful predictors of actual behavior. What people think directly influences what they do behind the wheel.
Which makes them incredibly important targets for public health interventions, right? Changing attitudes could change behavior.
Absolutely, they're a key target. But we also have to remember, behavior isn't only influenced by attitudes. Other factors play a big role too. Things like perceived behavioral control. Do people feel they can avoid DCU? Do they have alternatives?
Like access to ride shares or public transport?
Exactly. And also social norms. What do people think others are doing? How common do they believe DACU is? And what do they think their friends or family approve or disapprove of? It's really a complex web of influences. Attitudes are just one piece, albeit a very important one.
So what are the practical implications here? What should policymakers or public health folks take away from this huge review?
Well, the review's discussion points to a few key things. First, there's a strong encouragement for public education campaigns, obviously. But these campaigns need to be smart.
How so?
They need to correct the misconceptions about DC safety for sure, but they also need to be careful not to overstate the risk relative to alcohol, because doing that could inadvertently backfire, maybe make cannabis seem trivial by comparison, which it isn't. It needs careful messaging.
Finding that balance.
The review also highlights the potential value of encouraging pre-planning for transportation before someone consumes cannabis, just like this successful Arrive Alive or Designated Driver campaigns for alcohol.
Makes sense. Plan your ride home before you partake.
Exactly. Thinking ahead is absolutely key to making safe choices when impairment is a possibility.
Were there limitations noted in the review itself about the studies they looked at?
Oh, yes, definitely. Like any broad systematic review, especially pooling data from so many different studies over time, there were limitations. They mentioned the heterogeneity. The studies were all done slightly differently, using different methods, different populations.
With different definitions sometimes.
Varying terminology, yes. And often a lack of really specific details in the original studies about the dose of cannabis used, the exact time between use and driving, the route of administration, smoking, edibles, etc. All those factors can influence impairment.
So it's complicated.
It underscores the complexity, absolutely. But despite those limitations, the review concluded that these 6 broad themes we've discussed provide incredibly valuable direction. They offer a truly comprehensive understanding of attitudes towards DACU right now, and that's a vital first step for informing prevention efforts and promoting safer driving practices, really globally.
Well, we certainly hope this deep dive has provided you with some vital knowledge to help navigate this really complex and evolving landscape of cannabis use in public safety. Staying well informed is probably your absolute best tool in this changing world. And as you go about your day, maybe consider this. Think about the potential gap between what you know objectively about the risks of DACU, perhaps from discussions like this, and what you might, under certain circumstances, be willing to do. Where does your personal perception meet or perhaps diverge from the broader evidence and the very real public safety implications?
That's a good question to ponder.
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of information.